10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, Happy New Year. I'm Amanda with DevExpress and I am here with Areg. Areg, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing exceptionally great. I think that we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to start 2024 on a high note. I think we learned quite a lot out of our hijinks last year streaming.
Yes,
And
a lot
I'm
of
not,
lessons.
yeah, I'm not sure about you, but I am hungry to try out our components on iOS. They
Okay,
said it
but
wasn't
first,
possible. Yeah.
that, well, you thought it was impossible.
Yeah, I was a doubter. I've been converted.
Oh my gosh. So we have a poll question. I'm going to try this. Areg, so hold on one second.
Yeah.
So I'm going to post it here. I'm going to have two, but I'm just going to do one right now. The first one is, have you used MAUI in a commercial application yet?
Hmm.
Let's see if this works. So it's gonna post a link, and then if you click on the link, you can answer the poll question, or you can just put yes or no in the chat box. So the question is, have you used a MAUI application, or are you in a commercial application yet? So that would be helpful for us to know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just going to continue on or wait for that to fill?
Um, I guess let's continue, and then as
Okay,
they
all
come
right.
in, I'll fill you in what the responses
Great,
are.
great. So the idea is that if you've been using our controls for a while, especially in something like WPF, you may have been used to using things like XAML, things like model view view model, which we call MVVM, and it's kind of been a challenge to move that out of the Windows environment into something else. So kind of the place everyone has wanted to move apps ambitiously is Xamarin, I believe. And when Xamarin was decommissioned and became MAUI, um, the next great big target became MAUI. So we actually, as you know, have a free offer for these MAUI controls. And so if you're building an app that's targeting a mobile technology. That is, if you're building an app for iOS, whether that be on the tablet or on an iPhone, or if you're building an Android capable app, you could use these particular components and you're going to be using the sorts of technologies you would be accustomed to in something like WPF. So that means C Sharp, that means XAML, and that also means model, view, view model. And there's actually a few steps here. If you're coming from a Windows background, we are doing this on a Mac computer today. And there's a few reasons for that, but you don't necessarily have to be using a Mac. Your life just becomes somewhat easier if you do that. Um, so essentially, what I was getting at is that there are a few steps involved if you're kind of used to uh, moving around in Windows, deploying apps in Windows, and developing apps within Windows. So, firstly, I guess what might be most striking is you're going to be using Visual Studio most of the time if you're using Windows. If you're using Mac, uh, the option used to be that you would be using the rebranded version of Xamarin Studio, which was Visual Studio for Mac. So, if you're curious about what that is, I'll jump into it right now. But it's basically Visual Studio for Mac. And I'm not too excited about it because Microsoft actually does not recommend this approach anymore. So this is kind of all deprecated old stuff. But you could certainly go down this route for another, I think, 11 months until this is totally removed. But basically, this is a rebranded version of Xamarin Studio, and if you want to build applications using it, you can, and it still actually works in Mac OS. This is not the recommended approach to building apps, but you do get, looks like my emulator just booted up, and
Cool.
it should be able to load the app, and it's actually having to restart Android from the very start, and it's loading the packages and building them. But the point is that you don't actually have to be using Visual Studio for Mac The recommended approach these days in non-Windows environments, if you're targeting MAUI, is to use VS Code. So just to reiterate, if you're using Windows, you're used to using Visual Studio for all your needs. I don't know if you guys heard that chime, but that just means that Android is now booting up, and now the actual application binary is going to be loaded into memory. So this was the simple Hello Android application that Visual Studio for Mac gave me. And so basically this runs fine. The only problem is that this is not really the recommended approach anymore these days. So I'm going to step out of this. But the idea is that we're going to be using Visual Studio Code today. So we're going to be saying goodbye to proper Visual Studio for Mac because this is being discontinued by Microsoft. Fortunately, Microsoft has put in some extensions in VS Code to make the process of building MAUI apps within VS Code as painless as possible. So it's actually pretty great in terms of experience. There are a few caveats, though, that are worth mentioning. Today, what I want to go ahead and do, or I want to, since I was kind of a doubter of whether or not such a thing was possible, I wanted to make sure that I could deploy to a real device. So I have a real device here. It's a iPhone 15, I believe. I believe that's what they
You
call it.
believe?
Yeah, I'm not really an iPhone user, but I had to become one to verify all these facts. So there were a few things I did have to do because I wanted to make sure that things actually do function. So what I went ahead and did is in Xcode, I wanted to verify everything does work, and I recommend you do these verification steps, making sure everything does work. Since you're going to be, I'm assuming the audience here mostly is going to be confined to Windows and Visual Studio. But if you're not, and you have a full Mac OS environment to you, you probably want to at some point open up Xcode and try to get a fully native Swift application working. And that works as you would probably expect it. I'm just gonna have to duck in and get my cable. I can go in and plug in my device, and actually, if I go ahead and now look at my connected devices here, I should have my iPhone, and I added the letter R here to make sure that I'm actually seeing the correct device here, not one of my other devices. And if I go ahead and start debugging, I should get a successful message, and I should also get an actual application loaded up on my screen. And looks like, yeah, it looks like I just got something. If you make out what's on the screen, it just says "Hello World," which is basically computer speak for greetings.
Right.
So basically, I have a functioning app that I can deploy, and that's all just a sanity check to make sure that on some level I could actually send things to this iPhone. So theoretically, MAUI should be able to do the same thing. The witchcraft here is that we're not going to be using Swift or the UI toolkits of macOS. We're going to be using C Sharp and MAUI to do all of this. And it's also going to allow us to have a few key advantages. And I'm sure everyone knows these by now, but the idea is that you could use other .NET Core libraries. You can also target Android if you'd like. And I think probably the greatest thing about using MAUI is you can leverage the fact that you get the experience and the wide set of developers that are coming at this from the Microsoft ecosystem. So people that know how to use C Sharp, but don't necessarily know how to use Swift or Kotlin. So it's generally very, very different environment, very different audiences, let's say. So typically, if you have a line of business application and you want to port it over to a mobile type display, you probably are constrained in terms of what skills your developers have. So likely, if you built one version of the app using C Sharp and Microsoft technologies, you probably want to leverage that and continue forward rather than bringing in a completely new team to build the mobile solution. So let's head right into kind of where I have things stored here. So let's go into where I believe I usually manage things. Let's go ahead and go into um, my directory where things are, and let's also talk about kind of how you can get these bits yourself. So if you go to our GitHub, we have one main account. DevExpress is the GitHub account, but actually we have another account, and I think it's so invaluable to explore this particular account. It's called DevExpress Examples, and as you can guess by the name, this is where we actually pick up all of our examples and we index them on our search engine. If you go to our support center, when you're searching, you're actually searching through these. So if you, for example, want to look at our data grid using Vue, so in DevExtreme that is, you can go ahead and look at an example that implements using the data grid in something like Vue, and you could get these bits and run it. And my point being is that these are fairly complex examples and they're all hosted here. So it's a great place to get started if you're looking through documentation and want to know how something a little bit more complicated would work. So again, it's DevExpress Examples. I think it's a great account to
Great. I
get
put the link in the chat.
yeah, so it's a great place to kind of familiarize yourself with some of our controls and implementation details. So if we go to MAUI here in our searches, there's actually something I want to start out with, which is actually this MAUI demo app, which is basically kind of the fully featured demo center within MAUI. So basically, if you are, again, coming at this from the Windows sort of perspective on things, Demo Center is the thing that we have already built and we installed to your public documents if you install our components. So when you run the installer in Windows, you get a full Demo Center. So you could look at WPF demos and WinForms and all the web demos as well. So the ASP.NET demos as well. This demo center is a little bit different because there's no way for us to actually install it on your computer because it's actually supposed to be deployed to, these mobile devices.
Mobile.
So since you're going to be installing on a developer machine that's not a mobile device, uh, you'll have no real opportunity to actually see this outside of navigating directly to this particular repository in DevExpress Examples. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've already cloned this particular repository, and there's no real magic here. I just done that to save a little bit of time. But if you go into this MAUI demo app, which is the default folder you'll get if you clone this repository, you'll see a set of folders, and it's kind of organized like our other examples, which is that you usually get a top level directory which tells you what languages are supported. So usually we have CS for C#, and we also have VB for Visual Basic. You're never going to find Visual Basic for any MAUI demos. I don't think you'll find any for any .NET Core demos either. I know it's probably not news to anyone, but Microsoft is not moving forward with VB in .NET Core environments. But anyway, the actual code here is in the CS directory. And I mentioned that because I noticed that VS Code kind of gets flustered when you don't give it this directory, and it's looking for CS proj files and all that stuff. So if I look at what's actually in this directory, you basically get the results of, what you would see the top level being if you, for example, ran one of our MAUI templates. So let's go ahead and open this into VS Code, and we'll step through kind of how we can get this up and running and emulate it correctly. So let's go ahead, and looks like I'm debugging something else. So let me, for the sake of demonstration, let me show you what it would look like if I did this cold. So going into VS Code right now, and it's this window here. So a few interesting things. So again, I want to contrast kind of what you see here relative to what you will see in Visual Studio. So whether you're using Windows at this point or Mac OS at this point, it doesn't actually matter. So you'd be seeing the same screen I'm looking at right now in Windows. There's no real difference. Um, but one difference between Visual Studio and what we're looking at right now is that there's no real understanding of VS Code that this is a project and it lives in a solution. So what I recommend doing, so you can get this bar down here, I'll collapse it right now, but uh, this is what you'll see, the default view. You'll get this, and it's kind of a jumble and a mass. You have a CS Proj entry here, you have a SLN entry here, but it's not organized the way Visual Studio does it. So in Visual Studio, we have something called a Solution Explorer, where you have a really convenient tree structure of kind of where everything is, and you could go to project properties pretty easily or add um, project items really easily. So what I recommend doing, there are a few things you should probably install in your VS Code environment if you haven't. One is that there is a great extension for .NET MAUI. So this is the base .NET MAUI support. Definitely go ahead and install this. It will install a few other things you probably have installed as well if you've used C# in VS Code, which is the C# Dev Kit, which is also fairly recent as well from Microsoft. Um, the .NET MAUI extension, I think, will ask you if you want code completions for iOS or for Android. You can kind of pick whichever one you're most likely to be using in the given project we're talking about. And I should also mention, since we have it on our blogs, that you could also consider using .NET Meteor instead. We'll cover this next time, but for starters, we will start talking about .NET MAUI and about how you can leverage this, because essentially the idea is that MAUI becomes a first-class platform in VS Code with this extension. And the idea is that if Microsoft was going to be moving away from Visual Studio for Mac, this really was necessary. We needed something like this particular extension to actually be productive within VS Code. And actually, it's really great. So the other thing is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I have gone ahead and installed support for, if I go into my enabled, yeah, so I've gone ahead and enabled these particular extensions and the C# Dev Kit as well. And what that's enabled me to do is if I go to my Solution Explorer, or I go to my, it's just called the Explorer in VS Code. Like I was saying, you get these items, it's kind of jumbled. It's not really organized. You have CS Proj files and you have SLN files. This is not the best for developing in .NET Core, and especially in more complicated projects and platforms like MAUI. So actually, you'll see that you get this Solution Explorer here now if you have these extensions enabled. And if you collapse this project or this folder view, you get this project view of what we can see. And actually, if you do expand these individual CS Proj, these are files, but they display here as folders. We get these nodes for the actual different points in the project. So we get the entry point here, and we get, the app.xaml. So this looks very familiar to you if you're coming at this from a background of being something like a WPF developer or a WinUI developer. So it's all really reassuring. From here, we can actually go ahead and start debugging and running the project itself. So again, we verified that I can actually build applications in Swift, in Xcode, and then deploy them to a real device. The big question is whether or not MAUI can support the same sort of thing for iOS devices. And I'm seeing my device here. I'm already connected and tethered to it. So I'm connected via USB, and so it's showing up here as well. So I'm selecting it, and now it's down here, seeing as my debug profile. And I'm going to go ahead and let's try to do this. So let's go ahead and debug. And it's going to be building this, and it's going to be running it on the actual hardware. And so once that's the case, we actually will get the demo center on a real life display. And it's going to take a little bit of time, but let me go ahead and load into it. And it's on this device. We're not going to spend too much time on this screen. We'll go ahead and load up the simulator in a moment. But the point is that it actually does load up, and I have access to all of these demos on my real life device. So I get
Nice.
everything here. That was quite a challenge to get here. And one other proviso I should also add, if we're doing this on iOS and not on Android, you will have to sign up for the Apple Developer Program to do this. So it's the Apple Developer Program. It's another subscription. If you don't do this, you won't be able to verify your application and deploy it to real iOS hardware, essentially. So
What do you
yeah,
have to
that's
do? You have to apply for the.
so you don't have to. It's not really an application. It's really just pay them money. So you pay them $100 a year, and you
Oh,
get an Apple developer account, and you're allowed to deploy to basically devices, and you get certificates that you can sign your app packages with. So that was a necessary step to do all this. It's not necessary in the Android world, but it's just a little extra step that Apple loved to throw in, so they did. Anyway, so let's go ahead and actually showcase what this is. So I was showing this on a real iPhone 15 Pro. So let's go ahead and show this on a simulator iPhone 15 Pro. So
hey, Arg, we did get a comment.
yeah,
It says, "Hello guys. Wow, that demo with the iOS looks great."
yeah. So actually, you're going to get completely native controls if you're using MAUI. I think I didn't really stop to talk about the advantages in particular of using MAUI, but there are a few. So if, and I'm talking about MAUI as just strictly MAUI. I'm not talking about Blazor Hybrid MAUI, which is also a valid strategy, except that it comes with its own costs, and I'm not going to dig into those here. You're well aware of them if you've chosen Blazor Hybrid in the first place. But MAUI, just I don't know if I want to call it vanilla MAUI, but MAUI provides a few advantages that you don't get if you're building in something like, let's say, uh, Electron, or if you're building in something where it's a web view technology, where you have some like a Blazor web view, like a Blazor Hybrid. So you get fully native controls in that case if you're using MAUI. So let's go and run these fully native controls on our iPhone simulator. So let's go ahead and point this at, I believe this is the simulator entry. Trying to see if they're, okay, so this is the one, it's the Pro. Yeah, all these different SKUs and models and tiers. It's the iPhone world. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and we're gonna get the simulator opening up any moment now. And I think I might even have it. No, I don't have it open. There we go. But the point is that this particular demo is going to be runnable inside of the simulator, and inside the simulator we can actually showcase what it is we're talking about. So let's head into it. So again, this is kind of familiar to you if you have used our demo center before in the past. And our demo center really was intended as a Windows app where you could see things like our reporting and dashboard libraries, but all within the confines of a executable in Windows. Here we have a fully fledged iOS app, and we can kind of head into some of the options we have here. So we can even right off the bat set it to the dark theme. I like the dark theme a little bit, so I'm just going to set it. And actually, it's picking up the fact that I asked it to debug from scratch, so it takes some time to build the package. That's why I was going off of based on my previous run. But here we can go into again this view, and let's again specify that I kind of want the color highlights to be for the dark theme, and uh, maybe here with the cyan or whatever this may be, teal for accent
It's like a
color.
teal.
Yeah. So one of the nice things here is that kind of the bread and butter of what we've done over the years in something like WPF or ASP.NET has been that you get a grid of some sort. And usually the very first thing or close to it that people want to do inside of a grid is they want to build some sort of customer relationship management portal where they want to kind of display customers and their records and their settings, and they want to edit those. So that's typically what our customers are doing themselves. That's what they're building. Um, but the difference between kind of a mobile or a tablet style view and the full real estate, the screen real estate you get in something like WPF is that in WPF typically you have enough space to display an entire grid. Um, Inside of something like a mobile view, you don't get that luxury. So you kind of have to be more creative about your choices. So, for example, if instead of having a fully tabular view with a lot of columns, you may want to instead separate out your entries in card views like this. And then from here, you want to also go ahead and have edit functionalities that make sense. So my point being is that kind of we had to reimagine how these views look like so they make sense to mobile developers. With that being said, what you're how you're writing this is kind of similar to kind of what you would expect as a WPF solution. So again, if we go into kind of what the WPF view is, or not the WPF, but the XAML view is of this particular control, uh, we kind of have the structure that you're kind of well used to by now if you're a fan of our MVVM libraries. That is, everything is binded together with data templates, and you get a set of XAML files that describe this complete UI. Uh, and the point here being is that we kind of have to reimagine these controls to make sense in a mobile context. So the grid still exists, but we're not really expecting it's going to get the same sort of um, featuring in your application that it once got. So we kind of are well aware of the fact that there are other types of views you want to go ahead and feature in a mobile style application. And in many cases, you're going to be introducing custom views and custom things like navigation and drawers and tabs and all of that. So we kind of wanted to play with that and not fight it, since we kind of have a bent towards, and our customers do as well, towards desktop software.
Mm-hmm.
You still have access to a few complex controls as well. So you get the base calendar view of our scheduler, but you also get things like the agenda and the week view, for example. So, for example, if I were to look at the appointment data I have here in our scheduler across the week, I can head into any one appointment and I could go ahead and make any edits or changes here. So I could, for example, go ahead and set a new resource here. So I have this term personal labeled as anniversary now, and I'll save that change. And now I get the update here in the scheduler control. And we also have things like recurring appointments as well. So these are all things you kind of expect to find in our control library. And so my point being is I recommend taking a look at what you get in our demo center, because this is kind of the very first step you take in the Windows world too. In Windows, when you download a new version of DevExpress, usually the first thing you do is you fire up the demo center and you look and see what's changed, what's new, and what's going on. And for the sake of kind of keeping this kind of traditional, I was going to have to show a grid, so here we go. Here's the grid. I'm not really sure to what extent mobile applications really make use of something like a grid, but I suppose if you do this in landscape mode, you get a little bit more real estate, and maybe someone would be interested in something like this. But generally speaking, I don't think that you're going to get the same sort of value out of um, purely tabular displays of the data. You probably want to go ahead and have more assorted and complex views, and that's perfectly fine. MAUI is built towards that, and the controls we offer are kind of a reflection of that fact as well. Um, with that being said, you still have advanced features in our data grid as well, so you can bind to something like a signal or data source and get updates. Again, just like in something like DevExtreme or something like WPF, it's kind of debatable if you want a top level view that has a binding like this, but it's an option. Um, Typically speaking, I think what would be more interesting is to bind this to something like one of our charts. So if you bind this to a line series, I think that that's when you start playing with actual
Ooh.
tangible use cases where you can actually update the data and get a sense of what's going on in terms of trends in the data. Um, anyway, my point being is that I recommend taking a look at this, but kind of the approach you're going to take to get started is a little bit different. So, firstly,
Hey, Arg,
if you
before
go,
you get started,
yeah,
I did post our second poll question,
yes,
and I just wanted to read it out. So I threw in the question: it's what type of app
mm-hmm.
are our users interested in building? And the response, the questions are, or the answers are: dashboard and data visualization, mail merge, reporting and document signing, or multi-user customer portal. And then the response from our first poll was no on
Okay, so
is
no,
anyone
no
build a
current.
MAUI commercial application?
Okay,
Just so you know.
yeah, I figured because Maui's a pretty new platform, and it really, if it's going to succeed or fail, that's really in the future. We have to really
Right.
see what happens in a few years and what the adoption is. One of the great things that Maui has, that something like Flutter does not have, is that Flutter requires you to learn a completely new technology from the ground up. So, in other words, to get started with Google's Flutter, you have to actually learn the Dart language. And since Dart isn't used anywhere, there aren't really Dart developers out there in the wild. So everyone has to start from the same ground level. In Maui, every the people mostly who are going to be attracted there are going to be a combination of .NET Core developers who are using Windows or ASP.NET
Mm-hmm.
and Xamarin developers. And both of those audiences are going to have at least familiarity with C Sharp. And if they're not using ASP.NET, they will also have familiarity with XAML. So it kind of XAML is one of those things that also divides uh, developers. Desktop developers tend to really love it in general, and web developers may not love it so much. But the great thing is that XAML is a gigantic improvement over what it replaced, which is basically um, a haphazard code behind approach that WinForms kind of popularized, but isn't really feasible once your application gets to a certain size. Anyway, I wanted to showcase if we go to NuGet.org, this is where you can get free NuGet packages. I wanted to contrast this with NuGet.devexpress.com. So if you go to NuGet.devexpress.com, this is kind of the home page for getting access to your private feed. So here you can go ahead and access the details for your private NuGet feed. And I'm not going to show it this time because I have burned myself so many times. I have to reset my NuGet feed so many times because showed I've shown the full details of my private NuGet feed. And so I've refreshed it. I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that one more time. I've learned my lesson.
Another lesson from 2023.
Yeah, fool me 10 times, shame on me, but 11 times, that sort of thing. It's not one or two. But
Hmm.
anyway, my point being is that if you go to NuGet.org, you see our free NuGet templates, and that includes this project template for Maui. So essentially, you don't have to pay us any money. You could just, and it's maybe that's not the wisest decision on our part, but it is there. It's been made in the past, and you best take advantage of it. So the idea is that you could download this particular project template for free and install it. And I've already done this, and that's why I'm kind of showcasing that my .NET CLI is a little bit different than what you would see if you haven't done anything to your .NET CLI. And so basically the idea is that once you've gone ahead and actually uh, installed this particular template, your list of new available project types is going to be a little bit expanded. So if I basically search for all the hits to the letters DX, which is our prefix to all the project types, uh, basically, let me scroll up a little bit. But at the very top of this list, you'll see something called MAUI-DX, and that's actually that particular template once I've installed. So with this template, I can actually get started with DevExpress and MAUI in a single project. And the rest of these, by the way, are there because they're non-free templates that I installed because I've already gone ahead and my NuGet feeds are all configured and all that stuff. And if you're using Windows, you don't have to do any of that stuff manually. If you're using non-Windows environments, you do it manually. But for most people who are using Windows, it's not really required to even think about it. But now that I have, I think I have to go 2 folders out, but now that I have verified that this particular MAUI project template exists, I'm going to want to go ahead and create a new MAUI DX based project, and I'm going to call it like DX MAUI 2 because I think I have an existing project by this name. I'm going to go into this project once it's created. So it's going ahead and creating it, the project, and let's go ahead and open this project to see what we get. So let's open into this window, and here DX MAUI 2, and this is just again to showcase kind of the pitfalls you may experience as well. So in my case, by the way, my particular pitfall is that looks like I don't have an updated Android SDK. I kind of ignored this because I've been focusing on iOS development because it was kind of landing on the moon for me. I kind of didn't really believe such a thing was possible because up until a few days ago, I was an Android user, and now I'm a
Now
loyal
you're
iPhone user. Yes, yes, I've always been. It seems like,
oh,
but
there's never a time now before iPhone.
yeah, I don't know how to not use the iPhone or how to not be a super fan of all
Welcome.
the Apple technologies. Yeah. It's kind of bizarre, I know, given that I'm in a Mac OS environment. But
Yes.
yeah, c'est la vie. That's how it worked out. But let's take a look at what happens if I were to immediately just launch into kind of the debugger. So by the way, we also get a XAML page, and we get not any big surprises here in terms of the options here. And I like generally verifying that I can make changes to the initial view. So I'll change the little text on the button, and also save that change. And let's go ahead and press F5 and see what the default. Oh yeah, actually and here already I should be kind of. I'll learn not to just press buttons willy-nilly, because if you notice here it says Areg iPhoner, and that's the name
Mm-hmm.
of my particular physical device. So it's going to be loading on this particular physical device in a bit. And sometimes in MAUI, a little bit means that it has to actually build from scratch. So it takes a little bit of time. And it looks like it's just about to do it. And you'll see that I get a little progress bar. So folks, we're doing it live, and it is working.
Wow.
So wow, it is. I'm
This
gonna
is
allow this.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. It's amazing, folks. And I'm gonna go ahead and show this on the simulator so everyone else at home can see this as well. So again, this is the default device that you get, and if you click on this, you can kind of set the debug target from here as well. So let me do that since I didn't do it like this last time. So let me go to the iPhone Pro simulator. So the iPhone 15 Pro, and it's the simulator. Okay, and now it's not my physical device; it's actually the simulator, and the debugger works a little bit different than in Visual Studio. In VS Code, you kind of have to have the right type of file open, which is why I navigated to the XAML file, or I can do the startup file as well, I believe. Um, And if I do that, it gets a little confused and says, well, this is C sharp code. Do you want to run this as, just plain old C sharp or not? No, actually, you always want to pick .NET MAUI or this second one. And today we're going to focus on this first one, .NET MAUI. So it's going to go ahead and load the simulator and showcase what you get, you know, like a stock standard with no real changes. The only thing I did is I added a few exclamation points to the text on the button. But the point is that this is kind of what you get out of the box inside of MAUI. And again, I've already kind of proven that this can get deployed to an actual iOS device, an actual iPhone. So it's not just a theoretical thing where I'm showing this in this particular simulator, and this is the simulator view of it, and I get the exclamation marks on the button like I said I would. And the reason, folks, that I'm kind of like rubbing my eyes kind of in disbelief at this is that it's a long process to get iOS 17 compatible sort of view to work. This is not an indictment of MAUI. This is just kind of how things work with Swift and Xcode and all of that. It's kind of not the most straightforward process to make sure you're running on the latest iOS version. Xcode is a gigantic installation, and Microsoft, sorry, not Microsoft, Apple does not make it the easiest process in the world to get an up-to-date Xcode with an up-to-date iOS functioning in tandem. So yeah, this is an amazing, amazing ability that you could kind of do this without bringing in Xcode. As far as I know, the only real disadvantage of doing this is that you don't get Wi-Fi debugging. It may be possible, but I haven't seen any way to enable Wi-Fi debugging, which is possible in Xcode. So I am tethered via USB cable to do this. So that's the one disadvantage if you were looking to leverage that fact. But otherwise, I've been really impressed with this fact. Let's also, while we're at it, go into kind of some of the base editors that you should or you will be getting in MAUI. So again, and if you're following along at home, what we could go ahead and do is this is actually another repository for our editors. So again, this can be found at DevExpress examples, but if you go to DevExpress MAUI or MAUI editors, I believe. I'm just going to type in MAUI and I'll see the entry we have here where we are getting started with our editors. And this is kind of what I'm going to showcase now. The only difference is I've already built it once, so it's going to be a little bit faster on my my machine to get up and running here. So I'm going to go ahead and go into MAUI editors, and I'm going to go ahead and run VS Code as well. So VS Code is now running with this project, and since I've already built it once, I don't have to really do much from scratch, I believe. But and again, I mentioned before, a little proviso, I recommend opening this C# folder whenever you can, because that's actually the folder where the CS proj and the SLN live. Otherwise, it's kind of really loud. The extensions are all the extensions are always complaining about, I can't find the solution project, or I can't find, which project I should choose and all that. It's kind of unnecessarily silly about kind of what you could possibly mean, and it's kind of obvious to us what we do mean. So let me go ahead and head into this particular C# folder and open it here in the equivalent of the Solution Explorer, and it's okay. I can recognize the Git repository. That's fine. That's fine. I don't mind recognizing the changes and the branches. And these are, again, this is the file view of what we're looking at on disk. And this here is the new Solution Explorer that Microsoft has been so nice to give us from Visual Studio. So now we get this Solution Explorer in VS Code as well. So this is just going to be a showcase of kind of some of the editors you get, and we'll head into kind of building. Again, I pressed F5 without really thinking it through, but I should always verify down here my target devices. By default, I have an iPhone connected physically. So this is actually going to, again, fire up my physical iPhone and actually load up the app there. So it's not super interesting because I've already shown this a few times. But if I were to, again, showcase what that is, uh, in this particular case, I get this particular view. So let me go ahead and not uh, spend too much time on that, and let's go back into this simulator here. So again, this is the iPhone 15 Pro simulator, which is the same model that I have physically here. So we kind of get a one-to-one correspondence of what I was showcasing earlier. But now, again, F5, I'm rebuilding and I'm attaching to debugger, and the simulator is here and it should be loading up. Yeah, it's loading up now. And this is basically some of the editors you get inside of MAUI. And kind of, I guess, a few basics are you expect to have the text or input that you're going to be using here that's featured in every application. You get a placeholder text as well. When there's a null text, essentially, you get a drop down as well. Nice thing is that you get the ability for things like masked edit support. So if you wanted to, enter in a particular phone number, you could do that, and you have things like password entries as well. So you can see,
Nice.
this input is also blocked out. So these are basically very straightforward things. Every app is going to have at least one or two of them, possibly all. And again, this is the date edit minus the scheduler. So basically, we had the scheduler with this similar sort of view. This was called the month view, and the scheduler here, it's just a standalone editor where I can pick a particular date. So I can go ahead and pick a long out, far out date, and pick it. Kind of very similar to every other platform we provide a date editor. The interesting thing here is that this is going to play a little bit differently again with having less screen real estate. Also, there is the fact that you're going to have, just like many of our themes in WPF that we call touch enabled themes, we increase the padding everywhere. So the touch enabled themes in something like WPF means that if you enable or if you toggle touch enabled themes, what you get is the same theme but with a lot more padding all over. And the idea is that padding enables you to fat finger your way through all the different editors and actually make some sense of what you're trying to do in the app.
Is fat finger a technical term?
We can make it a technical term. It seems that it ought to be if it's not. So, but yeah, this is kind of the sort of the up and running sort of approach to what you'll get with MAUI. And this may not seem extremely exciting, but if you actually have tackled with the process of writing things in Swift and getting them on an actual iPhone as a verified app, this is a breath of fresh air because it just works. It just works. There's no real extra complaint. So once you have verified, you can deploy a Swift based application in Xcode. Everything in MAUI is just fairly seamless, and the great thing is that if you don't really want to learn very much more, you don't want to bother with storyboards and Xcode, you kind of are back to the meat and potatoes of what an application is in the Windows world these days. With WPF and WinUI, you get all this XAML and all these bindings, and you get whatever MVVM libraries you want to be using. So there's a community toolkit for MAUI. You could use the MVVM library that they provide. We also have our own MVVM library as well, and so you can make use of that as well. And just to showcase that, in case We have some potentially WinForms users that are not aware of this, but we have it's called a DevExpress free MAUI. Sorry, DevExpress free MVVM. Yeah, MVVM. And this gives you basically the sort of capabilities that you can get in an external library like MVVM Lite or Caliburn Micro, or with the community toolkit in MAUI with MVVM. You get all that here with our library and our support here. And the reason that you might want to do this is that you may already be doing this in your other DevExpress apps. The other thing is that if you want to uh, use components in your views, typically speaking, the components need to be aware of and support the things like event to command and the sorts of sourcing options that are available in the MVM library. And that's why it makes sense for a component vendor to write their own MVM library or to standardize on one. Just like how in the .NET world, we support ND Framework and we have XPO as well, and the same sort of thing applies here. So actually, this is kind of, I think, a good touching off point. Kind of, I think it's a lot of information for people to digest all at once. But the point is that if you want to experiment with MAUI a little bit and see what you can get up and running on a real device, the good news is that it's not all too challenging, especially if you can do it in something like Swift. So if you're able to get this running in Xcode or in Swift, it's actually really straightforward to do it in something like MAUI. And I guess the final note here that's worth mentioning is that we were using macOS today. You don't have to deploy to iOS. I personally am doing it because honestly, I think it's a real unnecessary headache to have um, to connect via an SSH connection to a build agent in macOS. So this is kind of the wisdom of Apple, but Apple basically requires people that in the past were building Xamarin apps targeting macOS, and now MAUI apps targeting uh, targeting iOS, to basically have a physical macOS device to actually deploy to the App Store. And you can't get around that fact. So either you need to have a Mac Mini somewhere in your office and you SSH into it for build purposes, and you're going to use Visual Studio to do that with a mixed success potentially, or you need to actually just do the whole thing on macOS. So those are your two options available to you. I elected for doing everything in macOS just because I don't want to futz around with SSH options for the rest of my life. SSH config is no fun in macOS. It's better to just get up and running and not to futz with all that stuff. And in any case, it is kind of jarring to actually see DevExpress up and running on macOS, and we're going to actually, I think, later on leverage some of our other technologies like Office File API in this environment to showcase that, yeah, actually there is no real limitation in terms of platform if you choose DevExpress. So you could use DevExpress and macOS and build iOS apps and do all those things to your liking. You're not really restricted. This isn't really the 10 years ago sort of period where things like Windows Phone existed, or that there was no way to target iOS outside of Swift. You can actually target iOS now using a technology like MAUI, and you're getting a fully native set of app packages that are running on real hardware. I just showed you that. So yeah, actually I've covered, I think, quite a bit. So I'm gonna hand it off. I don't know if I hand it off to you, Amanda. I don't know. Do we ever work out these mechanics?
I mean, yeah, you can hand it off to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Take it away.
Yeah.
All right. Amazing. I love that you are now a converted iPhone user.
Oh yeah.
I've essentially forced you to do so
Oh
by
yeah.
doing
Life
this
is so much better.
Twitch stream. All right. So if you haven't followed us yet, please do so. Also turn on your notifications so you know when we are going live and you don't miss a second of this compelling content. Also, tomorrow at 10 a.m., we have another live stream Don Wibier and Gregory are back. They are doing DevExtreme Angular, getting started. So you can join us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on Twitch and YouTube Live. All right. Areg, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.